The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Detroit skyline as Judge William Henderson stepped out of his hotel room. At 70 years old, his silver hair caught the light like a crown of wisdom, but today he wore no badge of honor, just a simple blue t-shirt, faded jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. After decades serving as a Supreme Court justice, retirement had given him the freedom to dress as he pleased. He was in town for his nephew's wedding, returning to the neighborhood where he'd grown up running through these very streets as a boy. The area had changed dramatically since then. Old corner stores replaced by artisanal coffee shops, familiar faces traded for young professionals who'd never known the community's rich history. His morning ritual was simple. A quiet walk to Sam's Diner, the one unchanged landmark from his childhood. The bell above the door would still chime the same tune it had for 50 years, and Miss Betty would still be behind the counter, serving the best pancakes in Michigan. As he strolled down Maple Street, memories flooded back, playing stickball with friends, helping Mrs. Johnson carry groceries, dreaming of becoming a lawyer while sitting on these same sidewalks. He smiled at how far life had taken him, from these humble beginnings to the highest court in the land. A police cruiser rolled slowly past, then stopped. Two officers emerged, their expressions shifting from routine patrol to sudden interest. Judge Henderson noticed but continued walking, lost in his reminiscence. "Hey, you there," the younger officer called out, his voice sharp with authority. "Stop right there." Judge Henderson turned slowly, decades of courtroom experience keeping his face neutral. He'd seen this scene play out countless times in legal cases, the assumption, the suspicion based solely on appearance. "Good morning, officers," he replied calmly, his voice carrying the measured tone that had commanded respect in countless judicial proceedings. The officers approached, hands hovering near their equipment belts. The younger one, Officer Mitchell, seemed particularly agitated. His partner, Officer Rodriguez, followed with similar tension. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Mitchell demanded, his tone accusatory. "Taking a walk to breakfast," Judge Henderson responded simply, maintaining his composure. "You got ID on you?" Rodriguez asked, moving closer. Judge Henderson paused. He knew his rights better than most. There was no legal requirement to carry identification while walking in public. "I don't believe I need to show identification for taking a morning walk," he stated politely but firmly. The officers exchanged glances, their suspicion deepening. "Listen, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Mitchell said, the excuse rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "We need to see some ID." "What suspicious activity would that be?" Judge Henderson inquired, his legal mind automatically cataloging the interaction. "Don't get smart with us," Rodriguez snapped. "This is a nice neighborhood. We need to know you belong here." The irony wasn't lost on Judge Henderson. He'd grown up on these streets when nice meant something entirely different, when community meant looking out for each other, not questioning who belonged. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job," he began diplomatically, "but I'm simply walking to breakfast. I haven't committed any crime." Mitchell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're making this difficult. Just show us your ID, and you can be on your way." A few early morning residents began noticing the confrontation. Some pulled out phones, sensing something wasn't right about two officers surrounding an elderly man on a quiet street. Judge Henderson stood his ground, not out of stubbornness, but principle. He'd spent his career defending constitutional rights. He couldn't abandon them now, even for convenience. "I respectfully decline," he said, his voice steady. "Unless you're detaining me for a specific crime, I'd like to continue my walk." The tension crackled like electricity. Officer Mitchell's face reddened, unused to being challenged. "Sir, I'm giving you one last chance." The morning that had started with golden sunlight and sweet memories was rapidly darkening, the shadow of injustice falling across the street where young William Henderson had once dreamed of justice for all. The morning air grew thick with tension as Officer Mitchell reached for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for loitering and failing to comply with police orders," he declared, his voice carrying across the quiet street. Judge Henderson's heart sank, not from fear, but from the familiar weight of this moment. In all his years on the bench, he'd heard countless stories like this. Now he was living one. "Officers, please," he said calmly, "I'm simply trying to visit the diner where I ate breakfast as a child. I'm here for my nephew's wedding." Rodriguez smirked. Sure you are. Everyone's got a story. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. As Judge Henderson slowly complied, he noticed more neighbors gathering on their porches. Several held up phones, recording the scene. A young woman across the street called out, "He didn't do anything wrong." "Ma'am, stay back," Mitchell warned, then roughly grabbed Judge Henderson's wrist. The metal cuffs clicked tight, pinching his skin. "There's no need for force," Judge Henderson said quietly. "I'm cooperating." "You should have cooperated when we asked for ID," Rodriguez shut back, patting him down with unnecessary roughness. Mrs. Wilson, who ran the corner flower shop, stepped onto the sidewalk. "Officers, I know him. He grew up here. His mother was my Sunday school teacher." Mitchell ignored her, pushing Judge Henderson toward the patrol car. "Watch your head," he said mechanically, though his hand pressed down harder than necessary. Inside the cruiser, Judge Henderson sat uncomfortably, his hands bound behind him. Through the window, he saw more people gathering, their faces a mix of concern and anger. Some shouted at the officers, others continued filming. "This is wrong." A young man yelled, "He's just an old man walking down the street." Rodriguez slammed the car door shut, muffling the protests. As they drove away, Judge Henderson caught glimpses of his old neighborhood through the window, the barbershop where he got his first haircut, the playground where he learned to shoot hoops, the library where he discovered his love for law. In the front seat, the officers talked as if he wasn't there. "Probably another one of those activists," Mitchell muttered, "coming here to stir up trouble." "Yeah, they always play innocent," Rodriguez agreed. "Then they claim discrimination." Judge Henderson remained silent, his mind working through the legal violations occurring. False arrest, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, potential civil rights violations. The list grew with each passing moment. At the station, they pulled him roughly from the car. Other officers watched as they led him inside, some with curiosity, others with indifference. The booking area smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. "Empty your pockets," the desk sergeant ordered, then remembered the handcuffs. "Right. Officers, search him." They found his wallet, a handkerchief, and his hotel key card. No phone. He'd left it charging in his room, planning a peaceful breakfast. "William Henderson," the sergeant read from his driver's license, then laughed. "Says here he's from Washington, D.C., long way from home, aren't you?" "I'm here for family," Judge Henderson replied with dignity. "Sure, family," Mitchell mocked, making air quotes. That's what they all say when they're casing neighborhoods. The booking process continued with deliberate humiliation. They took his fingerprints roughly, photographed him like a common criminal, and made snide comments throughout. "You know, you could have avoided all this," Rodriguez said while filling out paperwork. "All you had to do was show some respect." Judge Henderson met his eyes steadily. "Respect is earned, officer," Knock demanded. This seemed to anger Mitchell further. Big words for someone in handcuffs. "You think you're better than us?" "I think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," Judge Henderson responded calmly. They led him to a holding cell, the bars clanging shut with finality. Other detainees looked up briefly, then returned to their own troubles. Judge Henderson sat on the metal bench, his mind not on his own situation, but on how many others had sat here unjustly. "Phone call?" he called out, knowing his rights. "I'm entitled to a phone call." Mitchell laughed from the desk. Yeah, when we get to it. You're not going anywhere." Minutes stretched into an hour. Judge Henderson waited patiently, his years of judicial experience teaching him that justice, though sometimes delayed, would eventually prevail. He just needed to make that one call. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Judge Henderson sat in the holding cell, maintaining his composure despite everything. The metal bench felt cold through his clothes, and the air carried that peculiar mix of cleaning products and despair that seemed universal to all police stations. 2 hours had passed since his arrest. Officers came and went, processing other detainees, but his requests for a phone call were repeatedly ignored. A younger officer, fresh-faced and nervous, glanced his way occasionally with what might have been sympathy. Still waiting on that phone call, Judge Henderson reminded them calmly as Officer Mitchell walked past. "You'll get it when we're ready," Mitchell replied dismissively. "Got real criminals to deal with first." The irony wasn't lost on Judge Henderson. In his decades on the bench, he'd upheld the constitutional right to a phone call countless times. Now he sat experiencing firsthand what he'd only read about in case files. A commotion at the front desk drew everyone's attention. A well-dressed man was arguing with the desk sergeant, waving papers. "I'm telling you, my client was arrested this morning on Maple Street. William Henderson." The sergeant checked his log. "Yeah, we got him. Who are you?" "Thomas Anderson, his attorney," the man lied smoothly. Judge Henderson recognized him. Tommy from the old neighborhood, now a successful lawyer. Word must have spread. "He hasn't called any attorney," the sergeant said suspiciously. "Because you haven't given him his phone call," Tommy shot back. "That's a violation of his constitutional rights." The exchange grew heated. Other officers gathered, including Mitchell and Rodriguez. Judge Henderson watched quietly, impressed by Tommy's persistence. "Look," Mitchell interjected, "your client was arrested for legitimate reasons. He refused to identify himself, showed disrespect." "Walking while black isn't a crime," Tommy interrupted sharply. "Neither is knowing your rights." The tension in the room escalated. Judge Henderson saw his moment. "Officers," he called out clearly, "I'd like to exercise my right to a phone call now." The desk sergeant, perhaps sensing potential legal trouble, nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Mitchell, give him his call." Mitchell unlocked the cell with visible irritation. "One call. Make it quick." They led him to an old phone mounted on the wall. Judge Henderson noticed several officers lingering nearby, pretending to work but clearly eavesdropping. "You gonna call your lawyer here?" Rodriguez mocked, gesturing toward Tommy. Judge Henderson smiled slightly. "No, I have someone else in mind." He dialed a number he knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Chief Justice Roberts' office. "Helen, it's William Henderson. Is John available?" The nearby officers exchanged amused glances, clearly thinking he was bluffing. Their expressions began to change as the conversation continued. "William, good heavens, where are you? You missed the conference call this morning about your Memorial Scholarship Fund." "I'm in a bit of a situation, John. I'm currently in custody at Detroit's 5th Precinct. False arrest, civil rights violations, the works." The silence in the room was deafening. Officers who had been pretending not to listen were now openly staring. "What? Are you serious? Give me 5 minutes." Judge Henderson hung up and turned to face the stunned officers. "The Chief Justice will be calling back shortly. You might want to inform your supervisor." Mitchell's face had gone pale. You're really?" "Retired Associate Justice William Henderson, yes," he confirmed quietly. "I tried to tell you." Rodriguez fumbled for his radio. "Sergeant, we need you in booking. Now." The next few minutes were chaos. The desk sergeant made frantic calls. Mitchell and Rodriguez hubbled in panicked whispers. Tommy Anderson stood by, trying not to smile. When the phone rang again, the sergeant answered with shaking hands. "5th Precinct. Yes, sir. Yes, Chief Justice. I understand. Right away, sir." He hung up and turned to his officers, his face ashen. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court just confirmed his identity. The Attorney General's office is now involved. The FBI is on their way. Mitchell looked like he might be sick, but he was just walking, we thought. "You thought what?" Tommy asked sharply. "That a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in a nice neighborhood." The sound of sirens approaching grew louder. Through the station windows, they could see multiple official vehicles pulling up. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in for the officers who had arrested a Supreme Court justice for walking while black. The police station transformed from a place of casual authority to controlled panic within minutes. Judge Henderson stood calmly by the phone while officers scrambled around him like startled birds. The desk sergeant was on his radio, calling for the police chief to come immediately. "This can't be happening," Mitchell muttered, pacing back and forth. "We're finished. Our careers are over." Rodriguez slumped against the wall, his earlier bravado completely vanished. "He tried to tell us. We didn't listen." The phone rang again. This time, the sergeant gestured for Judge Henderson to answer it himself. "Sir, I believe this call is for you." Judge Henderson picked up the receiver. "William Henderson speaking." "Bill, it's Janet," came the voice of Attorney General Janet Thompson. John briefed me. Aren't you all right? Have they mistreated you? I'm fine, Janet, though I can't say the same for constitutional rights in this precinct. Officers within earshot winced at his words. The sergeant was now sweating visibly. The FBI is 3 minutes out, Janet continued. I'm personally overseeing this. Those officers have no idea what they've done. They're beginning to understand, Judge Henderson replied, watching Mitchell's hands shake as he tried to fill out paperwork. After hanging up, Judge Henderson turned to Tommy Anderson. Thank you for coming down, Tommy. Your timing was perfect. Tommy shook his head in disbelief. When Mrs. Wilson called me, she just said they'd arrested an elderly man from the neighborhood. I had no idea it was you, Judge. The front doors burst open as FBI agents entered, their badges prominently displayed. Special Agent Reynolds, a tall woman with sharp eyes, took charge immediately. Where is Justice Henderson? She demanded. The desk sergeant pointed weakly. Right here, ma'am. Agent Reynolds approached Judge Henderson with respect. Sir, I apologize for what you've endured. We're here to ensure this is handled properly. Thank you, Agent Reynolds. I appreciate your prompt response. More vehicles arrived outside. Through the windows, they could see news vans beginning to gather. Someone had leaked the story. The police chief, Chief Daniels, rushed in looking disheveled, clearly pulled from his day off. His face went from confusion to horror as Agent Reynolds briefed him. You arrested Povieux. Chief Daniels exploded, turning to Mitchell and Rodriguez. Do you have any idea what you've done? Chief, we didn't know, Mitchell stammered. He didn't say he was a judge. I told you I was here for my nephew's wedding, Judge Henderson interjected calmly. I told you I grew up in this neighborhood. But you didn't want to hear anything except what you already decided about me. Chief Daniels removed his hat, running his hand through his hair. Justice Henderson, on behalf of the entire department, I cannot express how sorry. Chief, Judge Henderson interrupted gently, your apology, while appreciated, doesn't address the systemic issue. This happens every day to people who can't make a phone call to the Supreme Court. The room fell silent. Even the FBI agents paused to listen. I was fortunate, Judge Henderson continued. I had the Chief Justice's personal number. But what about the young man in the next cell? The single mother who was brought in this morning? Who do they call? Chief Daniels nodded slowly, the weight of the situation fully hitting him. You're right, sir. This is bigger than one incident. Agent Reynolds stepped forward. Justice Henderson, we need to formally release you and document everything that's happened. There will be investigations. Of course, Judge Henderson agreed. But first, I'd like these handcuffs removed properly. Chief Daniels personally removed the handcuffs, his hands trembling slightly. I'll be suspending these officers immediately, pending full investigation. Mitchell and Rodriguez looked devastated. Their badges and guns were confiscated on the spot. As Judge Henderson rubbed his wrists, more officials arrived, representatives from the Department of Justice, Internal Affairs, and the Mayor's office. The small police station was becoming crowded with people who suddenly cared very much about what had happened here this morning. Justice Henderson, Agent Reynolds said, we've arranged for you to be escorted anywhere you'd like to go. Thank you, but first, Judge Henderson looked around the room. I'd like to speak with the other people in holding. They deserve to know their rights are being protected too. The request surprised everyone, but no one dared refuse. As they walked toward the holding cells, Judge Henderson turned to Tommy Anderson. Would you stay and help? These people need legal representation. Tommy nodded firmly. It would be my honor, Judge. The morning that had started with a simple walk to breakfast had become something much larger, a moment that would change not just this precinct, but potentially the entire system. The police station had become a hive of activity unlike anything the precinct had ever seen. Federal agents moved with purpose, documenting everything. News crews gathered outside, held back by barriers hastily erected by nervous officers. The weight of what had transpired was sinking in for everyone present. Chief Daniels personally escorted Judge Henderson to his office, offering him coffee and a comfortable chair. Justice Henderson, please, make yourself comfortable. Is there anything you need? Just water would be fine, thank you, Judge Henderson replied graciously. Despite everything, he maintained his dignified composure. Agent Reynolds entered with a tablet showing live news feeds. "Sir, the story's gone national. Every major network is covering it." On the screen, reporters stood outside the precinct. In an unprecedented incident, retired Supreme Court Justice William Henderson was arrested this morning while walking to breakfast in his childhood neighborhood. Judge Henderson sighed. "I never wanted this attention. I just wanted pancakes at Sam's Diner." A knock at the door interrupted them. The mayor had arrived, looking flustered and concerned. "Justice Henderson, I came as soon as I heard. This is inexcusable." More officials continued to arrive: the city council president, the state attorney general, and representatives from various civil rights organizations. Each offered apologies and assurances that this would never happen again. Judge Henderson listened patiently before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your concern, but we must focus on the larger issue. This isn't about me, it's about what happens every day in communities across our country." Meanwhile, Mitchell and Rodriguez sat in an interview room with internal affairs investigators. Their union representatives had arrived, but could offer little comfort given the circumstances. "Officer Mitchell," the investigator began, "walk me through your decision to arrest Justice Henderson." Mitchell's voice shook. He looked suspicious. "He wouldn't show ID. We thought." "You thought what?" "That a black man walking down the street must be up to no good." The investigator's tone was sharp. In another room, FBI agents interviewed other officers who had witnessed the booking process. Each account painted a damaging picture of casual discrimination and abuse of power. Back in the chief's office, Judge Henderson was speaking with Tommy Anderson about the other detainees. "Tommy, I want you to review every arrest made by these officers in the past year. Look for patterns." "Already on it, Judge," Tommy replied. "I've got my whole firm mobilizing." The police union president arrived, trying to manage the crisis. "Justice Henderson, while we deeply regret this incident, these officers were following what they believed." "Stop," Judge Henderson interrupted firmly. "Don't insult both of us by defending the indefensible. Your officers violated multiple constitutional rights and department policies." Outside, the crowd of reporters had grown. Community members had also gathered, including Mrs. Wilson from the flower shop and other witnesses to the arrest. Agent Reynolds received a call and stepped aside. When she returned, her expression was grave. "Justice Henderson, the president has been briefed. He's asked the Justice Department to launch a full investigation into this department's practices." Chief Daniels slumped in his chair. The implications were staggering: federal oversight, potential lawsuits, careers ended. "Chief," Judge Henderson said, not unkindly, "this is an opportunity, not just for punishment, but for real change." A commotion outside drew their attention. The desk sergeant announced, "Sir, your family has arrived." Judge Henderson's nephew, David, rushed in with other family members. "Uncle Bill, we've been worried sick when you didn't show up for the rehearsal dinner." "I'm fine, David," Judge Henderson assured him, embracing his nephew. "Though I'm afraid I've inadvertently overshadowed your wedding." "Are you kidding?" David replied. "You're making history, again." As the afternoon progressed, the precinct became a command center for what was rapidly becoming a national incident. Civil rights leaders called for investigations. Legal analysts debated the implications on television. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice reform. Judge Henderson finally stood. "I think it's time I addressed the media." Chief Daniels nodded. "Of course, we'll arrange a press conference immediately." "No," Judge Henderson said thoughtfully. "Not here. At Sam's Diner, where this day was supposed to begin." As they prepared to leave, Judge Henderson turned to Mitchell and Rodriguez, who were being escorted to suspension hearings. "Officers," he said quietly, "I hope you learn from this, not just about the law, but about seeing the humanity in everyone you encounter." The two officers couldn't meet his eyes, the full weight of their actions finally hitting home. The convoy of vehicles leaving the precinct was impressive: FBI escorts, police cars, and media vans, all heading to a small diner where an elderly man had simply wanted breakfast and instead sparked a national conversation about justice, equality, and the long road still ahead. Sam's Diner, usually quiet at this hour, had become the epicenter of a national story. News crews lined the street, their satellite trucks creating an impromptu media village. Inside, Miss Betty, now in her 80s, served coffee to reporters with the same grace she'd shown for decades. Judge Henderson sat at his favorite booth by the window, finally enjoying the pancakes he'd set out for hours ago. Across from him sat David, his nephew, still processing everything that had happened. "Uncle Bill, you could have told them who you were right away," David said quietly. Judge Henderson set down his fork. "And what about those who can't? What about the delivery driver last week or the teacher last month? They don't have Supreme Court connections." Outside, the press conference was being set up. Microphones clustered on a makeshift podium, while cameras jockeyed for position. The entire nation was watching. When Judge Henderson stepped outside, the questions came rapid fire. He raised his hand for silence. "Today, I experienced what too many Americans face regularly," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I was judged not by my character or actions, but by assumptions based on my appearance." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. "This isn't about two officers or one police department. This is about a system that allows such assumptions to flourish unchecked. We must do better." Back at the precinct, the fallout continued. Officers Mitchell and Rodriguez faced immediate suspension without pay. Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review of their arrest records, finding troubling patterns. Chief Daniels held his own press conference, announcing sweeping changes. Effective immediately, all officers will undergo intensive bias training. We're implementing new accountability measures and civilian oversight. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly. Agent Reynolds and her team reviewed hundreds of cases, finding systemic issues that went far beyond the two officers. In Washington, emergency sessions were called. Senators who had worked with Judge Henderson during his confirmation hearings expressed outrage. "If this can happen to a Supreme Court justice," one senator declared, "imagine what ordinary citizens endure daily." Judge Henderson's phone rang constantly. Fellow justices, civil rights leaders, even the president. But he focused on the local impact. That evening, he met with community leaders at the local church. The basement filled with residents sharing their own stories of profiling and harassment. "My son was stopped 3 times last month just walking home from school," one mother shared tearfully. "They pulled me over because my car looked too nice for me," added a young professional. Judge Henderson listened to each story, taking careful notes. Tommy Anderson sat beside him, documenting everything for potential legal action. The next morning, Judge Henderson filed a landmark civil rights lawsuit. But unlike typical cases, he announced all proceeds would fund a new initiative, the Justice for All Foundation. This foundation will provide legal support for those who face discrimination but lack resources to fight back, he explained at another press conference. The impact rippled outward. Police departments nationwide began reviewing their policies. Congress fast-tracked new legislation on police reform. Law schools added new courses on implicit bias and constitutional rights. Mitchell and Rodriguez, facing criminal charges, finally spoke publicly. "We were wrong," Mitchell admitted, his voice breaking. "We let our biases override our duty. We're deeply sorry." Their apology, while appreciated by some, couldn't undo the damage. Both lost their badges permanently and faced federal civil rights charges. The wedding, remarkably, proceeded as planned. Judge Henderson walked his nephew down the aisle, the celebration taking on deeper meaning. During his toast, he spoke not of the incident, but of hope. "Love conquers hate," he said, raising his glass. "Justice prevails over prejudice, and change, though slow, is always possible." Media coverage continued for weeks. Documentary filmmakers arrived, wanting to tell the larger story. Publishers offered book deals. Universities invited Judge Henderson to speak. But the most meaningful moment came a month later when a young officer approached him at Sam's dinner. "Justice Henderson, I'm Officer Johnson. I just graduated from the academy. Your case was part of our training. It changed how I see my role." Judge Henderson smiled, shaking the young officer's hand. "Remember, son, the badge is a privilege, not a right. Use it to protect and serve everyone." As autumn painted Detroit in golden hues, the city had changed. New policies, new training, new awareness. The incident that began with a simple walk to breakfast had sparked a movement, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest moments of standing up for what's right. 6 months later, Judge William Henderson stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee, the same room where he'd once been confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. But today, he wasn't here as a judge. He was here as a citizen who'd experienced firsthand what millions face daily. Distinguished members of the committee, he began, his voice resonating through the chamber, "I come before you not seeking sympathy for my experience, but action for our nation." The Henderson Act, as it came to be known, proposed comprehensive police reform. Body cameras became mandatory, bias training was standardized, and civilian oversight boards gained real power. The legislation passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Back in Detroit, the changes were already visible. The police academy curriculum had been rewritten. Veterans like Tommy Anderson taught new recruits about constitutional rights. Community policing wasn't just a phrase anymore, it was practiced daily. The 2 officers who arrested Judge Henderson faced their day in court. Mitchell received 3 years probation and community service. Rodriguez, who had shown genuine remorse and became an advocate for reform, received a suspended sentence and now spoke at police academies about the dangers of prejudice. "I destroyed my career and nearly destroyed lives because I couldn't see past my own biases," Rodriguez told a class of cadets. "Don't make my mistake." The Justice for All Foundation, funded by Judge Henderson's lawsuit settlement, had already helped hundreds. Young lawyers worked pro bono, taking cases that would have otherwise gone unheard. The Foundation's motto, displayed prominently in their offices, read, "Justice delayed is justice denied." 1 year after the incident, Sam's Diner hosted an unexpected gathering. Judge Henderson invited everyone involved, from the officers who arrested him to the witnesses who filmed it, from the FBI agents to the community members who shared their stories. "Healing requires facing our past," he explained to the assembled group. "Growth demands uncomfortable conversations." Mitchell sat across from Mrs. Wilson, the flower shop owner who had tried to vouch for Judge Henderson that morning. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You tried to tell us, and we wouldn't listen." She nodded slowly. "Sorry is a start. Change is what matters." The meeting led to monthly community dialogues. Police officers and residents shared meals, stories, and slowly, trust began to rebuild. Judge Henderson returned to the Supreme Court building one final time, not for a case, but to dedicate the William Henderson Library of Civil Rights. Law students would study there, learning not just from books, but from the lived experiences documented within. "Every case file tells a story," he told the gathered students. "Behind every legal brief is a human being seeking justice." National police departments adopted the Henderson Protocols, guidelines for respectful interaction and de-escalation. Police chiefs from across the country visited Detroit to learn from their transformation. The ripple effects continued. Schools added civil rights education to their curricula. Cities reviewed their policing policies. The phrase, "walking while black," became part of the national conversation about equality. 5 years later, at David's son's christening, Judge Henderson held his grandnephew and reflected on the journey. The baby, named William in his honor, represented hope for a future where such incidents would be unthinkable. "What will you tell him about that day?" David asked. Judge Henderson smiled. "I'll tell him that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest changes. That standing up for what's right matters even when, especially when, it's difficult." The final scene of this story isn't in a courtroom or police station, but at Sam's Diner. Judge Henderson sits at his usual booth, enjoying pancakes. A young officer enters, orders coffee, and nods respectfully. They don't know each other, but they share an understanding. Outside, children of all backgrounds play together in the park across the street. Their laughter carries on the morning breeze, a sound of hope and possibility. The incident that began with an elderly man wanting breakfast had evolved into something far greater, a reminder that change is possible, that justice can prevail, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments can spark extraordinary transformations. As Judge Henderson often said in his speeches, "I was fortunate. I had a voice that could be heard." But true justice comes when we listen to those who have been silenced, when we see those who have been overlooked, when we stand with those who have been pushed aside. His legacy wasn't just in laws passed or policies changed, but in hearts opened and minds expanded. The morning walk that changed America had completed its journey, leaving behind a path for others to follow toward a more just tomorrow.